Okay, so another activity that we are going to do to review, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at, we talk a lot in the Soul Studies book about men's role when it comes to the Civil War, but we don't get to, we talk a smidgel, just a smidgel, about the women and children. We briefly mention and talk about um, Mary Ann Bickerdike, who is a famous nurse during the Civil War. And we also talk about how young men are able to boys about your age could be drummer boys in the war, but that's kind of the extent of what we talk about when it comes to the women and children. Now they still have also a key role when it comes to the Civil War, and so we're going to look at this little diagram and I'm going to talk you through it, but then again later I want you to go back and I want you to complete these pages. Now the directions are here on the side, so I'm going to explain how to do this, but then you can also go back and further look at it. Okay, so for it says click on women. If you click on the word women, see how my cursor is over the word women, you will see that the website pops up. When you click on that website, it opens a whole new browser window. So then you are able to read about what women did. Now, we did talk about at home, talk about how the women were, because the men went off to fight, now the women are the ones that are having to take the jobs and they're the ones that have to work. So gives you a little bit more information about what they did at home, how they cared for, but they were able to be nurses. Some of the things we did not talk about, though, which is really kind of cool, women worked as spies. How many of you want to be a spy? Ooh, spies are fun. Some of the top spies for both sides during the Civil War were women because women didn't fight. You wouldn't suspect that a woman would be a spy, which is why they were perfect for being spies. And you just needed a nurse, and so you could secretly be infiltrating a camp for the enemy side and be a nurse, quote unquote, but you're actually spying to find out. They included slave women in the South who passed on troop movements and information in the North. They also included women in the North who supported the South and were able to persuade officers to tell them important information. Okay. Women were soldiers. Now, although women were not allowed to fight, many women still joined the army and fought because they would disguise themselves. Now, I know we didn't talk about this as well, and we would have talked about it on during our Underground Railroad field trip, but they actually emphasize and talk about how there was a woman who dressed herself as a man and her husband, and she was an African American, but she was a lighter tone of an African American, and her husband, who was a little bit darker, she dressed herself as a woman, or I'm sorry, she was a woman who dressed herself as a man and then pretended that her husband was her slave. And that's how they were able to get um into the free states. Think of, and I know this movie is coming out, and yes, it's Disney, but bear with me, about the movie Mulan. Mulan is a woman who goes off and fights in a war as a man. She cuts her hair, wears bulky clothing, and changes so then it looks like she is a man. And here's the thing, soldiers slept in their clothes and they didn't change or bathe that often, so you couldn't tell if a woman was there or not. um, there's also like, you could distinguish yourself, you could hide yourself. Now if she was discovered, she was usually sent home without being punished, so phew, that's a life good thing. But women did fight as soldiers. They would disguise themselves so then they could fight. Okay, and then we're going to, not right now, but we're going to look a little bit later at some very important women. We've talked about Harry Beecher Stowe. She was the one that wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. We talked about Harriet Tubman last week. Clara Barton, she's one of my personal favorites. We're going to talk about her in a little bit. But these were some very famous women during the time of the Civil War. Okay. Now, if we close out of that tab, let's look at children direction number 2. Click on the children, see what the children did during the Civil War. And if we click on that here, see, boys in the army. So ages 13 to 17, they were fought. Drummer boys, boys as young as 10. So some of you could have been drummer boys. You could have also been a messenger. You ran messages from one side of the army to the other. We have John Clem. He is one of the first. He's a famous young famous soldier who was only 9 when he first tried to join. He did not give up, and he kept. Later, he was finally able to join when he was 13. John Clem is also coincidentally from Ohio. So we do talk about him. He's one of our famous Ohioans. Children also worked in army camps, so they would help with washing dishes, fixing meals. They helped at home. The children in the South, uh, children that lived in the South had an added fear because much of the fighting took place in the South. So they probably saw a lot more than what the Northern children saw. And then some interesting facts that some boys would put a note with the number 18 on their shoes when applying for the army. This way they could say, I'm over 18 without really lying. Okay. But you had that would remind them that they needed to make sure that they were over 18. So, but take some time, read through this page a little bit more and see what's going on there. You do need to complete this activity, please. So, where's compare and contrast the women and children. And then finally, I want you to take a look over here. Now, this one says that you're going to click on the people's names. So, like if I click on Claire Barton's name, it brings up the link. There's Harriet Tubman and Harriet Beecher Stowe. We've talked about these 2 women already, so I'm going to click on Claire Barton. But it kind of gives you a little bit of background information about her and why she decides to be who she is during the Civil War and what she does to help. Like I said, Claire Barton's kind of one of my personal favorites. I really like her. She's not from Ohio, hence why we don't really emphasize her in in our Solstice book. But so read through these 3 women. There were some other women that were mentioned in this one, so if you would like to include, but give me some facts about women and their roles in the Civil War, okay? Until next time.